This week I'm sharing some of the tips that have taught me so much about cinematography. Hello, my name is Simon Cade and this is DSLR Guide. So this week we're looking at my favourite part of filmmaking, and that is cinematography. So the way this will work is we'll start with some kind of practical tips that are a bit more technical, and then we'll move into the creative side and look at how we can tell stories through the camera work and the lighting. So the simplest way to make your job a lot easier is to film in places where there's lots of space. The number of times I've been trying to film in a tiny little room and I've got my camera backed up all the way against the wall and I can't get my lights where I want them because they'll be in the shot. So just clearing furniture out of rooms and just moving to places where there's a bit more space makes a huge difference. It means that you can place your camera exactly where you want it, and same with your lights. Plus, you're not forced to use a super wide lens and you can have a bit more space between your actors and the background. So this means that when you're lighting, it's a lot easier to stop the light from spilling onto those back walls and just kind of filling up the room. It also helps with kind of depth and having some perspective. So the next tip is to practice a lot. Recently I've been really enjoying going out running and taking some photos for my Instagram. So the idea is I post a photo on Instagram every day, and it's just a really good continual practice of finding composition and lighting. And I have to say that I've learned a lot in terms of my raising the standard for what I would consider to be a good composition. So just, finding frames and finding images in the natural world without kind of changing anything is a really interesting way to learn more about cinematography and just get some practice. Now the next one is that cutting light is just as, if not more important than adding light. So the idea is that you rig up kind of pieces of cardboard on a C-stand or flags. You use black wrap, which is one of the most essential lighting tools to stop your lights from kind of spilling into the whole room. You can use it as barn doors to kind of focus the beam, because if everything is evenly lit, then that's a very kind of neutral look. It's only through the intensity and the placement of the shadows that we can get some emotion from the lighting. And this is even more important if you're shooting in the natural light of that location, because in that case, everything is 100% about the way that you choose to remove the light. So now let's talk about the more creative side of cinematography. The first thing is motivated lighting. Now, if your light comes from a very natural place, then it won't draw attention away from the story. So in general, it's best if the audience isn't aware of the fact that it's a lit scene. So light naturally comes from windows and through doorways, but also in practicals such as a lamp on a desk. Or you could even stretch to justify a harsh rim light by having a practical off in the background. So I think the best thing is to always be thinking about motivated lighting and where the light is coming from, but also to remember that your primary job is to present the emotions and the look that the director is going for. And sometimes you do have to take liberties and kind of cheat the lighting a little bit. So I think each cinematographer will have their own kind of style and their own balance between natural lighting and making sure that all the light is justified. And then on the other hand, remembering the quote that where does the light come from? The same place as the music. So cinematography is all about visuals. So while you can use as much influence as you can with the lighting and the composition, at the end of the day, what you're pointing the camera at is going to be just as important as the way that you point the camera at it. So set design, locations and costumes are all really, really important parts of the whole visual aspect of a film. So I think if I ever get the chance to rent some really expensive cinema lenses, I'll put that budget instead into the production department, because I think that they can have a lot more impact on making sure that the story is told correctly. For instance, having the colour palette of someone's clothes reflecting their personality and their feelings, and it's the same with the location and the world that surrounds them. Those are the things that really make a difference, whereas the kind of slight differences between different lenses are only going to make a little bit of a difference. So a good cinematographer makes beautiful images. A great cinematographer knows exactly when not to use beautiful images. So by this I just mean that there are lots of kind of conventional things that you can do to make your images look amazing, but a good cinematographer will know when to use those conventional rules, like the framing guides, rule of thirds, and giving people enough looking room, but then they also know when not to do that and what kind of effect that will have. It's the same with the height of the camera and all these other things that I did actually talk about in a video called Framing and Composition, Storytelling with Cinematography. And in that I'd go really in depth into the kind of decisions that you can make as a cinematographer and how they affect the emotions of the characters in the story. So lighting is very similar. There are lots of kind of conventions that you can follow to make people look as good as possible, but then also you're going to have to think about whether you want to use really unflattering lighting on a certain character or at a certain point in the film. So again, in a video that I'm working on now, I'll be going into this in a lot of depth as part of the Storytelling with Cinematography series. So the next thing is the most important part of cinematography, and that is visual storytelling. So let's say you have a script that is very dialogue heavy. Well, I think it's the cinematographer's job to be working with the director or whoever it is to try and find as many opportunities to tell the story visually as possible. So that's a very vague kind of idea, so let me give you a couple of examples. The first one is the classic romantic comedy airport scene where the couple are being split up and one of them is moving very far away. Now this is already a visual way to show the distance in their relationship. Now they say goodbye and we follow one of the characters walking away, but then suddenly they change direction and start running back towards the plane that's about to leave. Without any dialogue at all, the audience knows exactly what's happened. The character has decided to change their mind and has also visually changed direction, which kind of really makes a lot of sense, which is why there doesn't need to be any dialogue at all. Whereas in real life, they'd probably get home and then talk to their friend about how they missed the other person, and then they'd eventually make a phone call and meet up. But that's really not a very cinematic way of doing things, and it's this visual way, the visual storytelling, that I think is one of the main factors of a cinematic film. So I know that's a bit of a cliche scene, so here's another example. Let's say a suspect is being questioned by two detectives, and at the mention of the victim's name, the suspect gets very angry and knocks over a bookshelf, scattering books all over the floor. Now this is already a visual way to show that they're very angry. After, as the detectives pick up the books, putting them back on the shelf, they're talking about what just happened. So it turns out that the suspect's reaction was in a way the last piece of the puzzle, and now the case is beginning to make a lot more sense to them. And here's the cinematography part. This is punctuated by seeing them slot the books back into the shelf, which I think is a really good visual way to show that everything is starting to make sense in their minds. All the pieces are kind of slotting together. I think having the bookcase kind of metaphor would be a really powerful way to visually show that things are starting to make sense and they're starting to understand how all the pieces fit together into one metaphorical bookcase. So it definitely seems to me that cinematography, like many other parts of filmmaking, is basically just a series of decisions. Do we want to have flattering lighting or unflattering lighting? Do we want to show the character as happy or sad? Do we want to show that through the camera movement that this is an energetic scene, or do we want it to be really static? It's just constant decisions and how those will creatively affect the scene. So the great thing about this is that all of these decisions can be made in pre-production. So anything I've talked about in the second half of this video, the creative side, the great thing is that you can kind of make these decisions just by looking at the script. And that's something I've been practicing a lot, is to watch the film in my head and think about what kind of shots would there be just from reading the script. And then you start making storyboards, which is a great way to get down your ideas about camera movement, framing, and things like the eye line, which is something I haven't even talked about in this video. Add notes about what the lighting is like, whether it's really flattering or whether it's something a bit darker, a bit more mysterious. And then you can include screenshots from other movies, TV shows, pieces of art, and just kind of, a lot of people talk about making mood boards that kind of fit with that idea that they have in their head of what the tone of the film is going to be. And to me, that is exactly what a cinematographer's job is, which is to look at a script and interpret that into visual things that line up with the kind of story that the director is trying to tell. So there's so much more to talk about cinematography, which is why I'm doing this series called Storytelling with Cinematography, where we go through all the different parts: framing, lighting, camera movement, lenses, and I'm just going to do a video on each of those ones where we go really in depth into how we can use those to tell stories. So make sure you look out for those videos, but otherwise I would like to say that I learned tons from these cinematography breakdowns that I've linked to on the blog post. It's basically an analysis of 3 films that you've probably heard of, and they go through in a lot of detail everything that I've been talking about in this video and a whole lot more. So I really highly recommend that you check those out, link in the description. But that's it for this week, and I'll see you next time.